Undercover work, often referred to as covert ops, is a method law enforcement uses to target complex problems within our society like organized crime, drug trafficking, or potential terrorist plots. Undercover work is incredibly complicated, and to be done well, it requires a network of officers, informants, and agencies that must communicate and work together like a well-oiled machine. When performed successfully, covert ops can collect critical evidence in cases that would be impossible to collect by any other means, but the collection of this evidence does not come without incredible risk. One of the most successful and early uses of covert ops by the FBI came in the form of Donnie Brasco, a small-time jewel thief that found his way into the embrace of the Bonanno crime family in New York City. After arriving to Little Italy in 1976, Brasco gradually began to make friends with mobsters and gained the family's trust, making it appear that he was becoming a willing participant to their criminal activities. However, Donnie Brasco was not actually who he presented himself to be. In fact, he was an FBI agent named Joe Pistone, and the intelligence that he gathered over the next 6 years would secure over 200 indictments of mob associates and result in 200 arrests, severely disrupting the activities of the Bonanno family. Pistone is still regarded today as one of the greatest undercover agents in the business. Pistone has published 2 books about his undercover experience, one in 1998 titled Donnie Brasco, 1988. Pistone has published 2 books about his undercover experience, one in 1988 titled Donnie Brasco, My Undercover Life in the Mafia, which was adapted into a film in 1997 that featured Johnny Depp as Pistone. In his second book, The Way of the Wise Guy, which was published in 2004, it offered Pistone's reflections on the etiquette of mob members. On today's episode, we're going to look back at Joe Pistone's covert ops experience and dive into the intricacies of creating a convincing cover like Donnie Brasco. We'll discuss the risks of going undercover and the sacrifices that an officer has to make when they decide to take on something as intense as a covert ops assignment. But to really understand how Joe Pistone found his success in undercover work, we're going to start at the very beginning.
You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Law and Disorder, where we dive into the world of true crime stories with memorable cases that have lasting effects for law enforcement.
Joseph Pistone was born on September 17, 1939 in Erie, Pennsylvania. His parents were Italian immigrants, and the Pistone family moved to Paterson, New Jersey when Joe was still very young. After graduating from high school, Joe Pistone attended Paterson State College, which is now known as William Paterson University, and he studied anthropology before graduating in 1965. However, it would be a few years before Pistone ever entered the field of law enforcement. He spent 1 year as a teacher in a public school in New Jersey and another 3 years working at the Office of Naval Intelligence before he was ultimately sworn in at the FBI on July 7, 1969, and assigned to the Jacksonville Field Office in Florida. But in 1974, when a suspicious number of truck hijackings began to occur in New York, Pistone was transferred to the New York Field Office to work in a truck and hijack unit. When it was discovered that he could drive an 18-wheeler and bulldozers, Pistone was given his first undercover assignment. Part of Pistone's success in his role as Donnie Brasco comes from his intense preparation in creating his alias. If an undercover officer does not have an ironclad backstory, it puts the officer and the case in great jeopardy. The details of an alias's backstory have to be perfectly crafted and completely understood by the officer who is living that alias. It was decided that Donnie Brasco would be a small-time jewel thief, so Pistone spent 2 weeks intensely studying the jewel industry to create more credibility for his cover story. And in preparation for his time undercover, Pistone's name was erased from all agency roles and personnel files, and anyone who called the FBI asking for Pistone was told that no one by that name was employed there. While he was undercover, friends, co-workers, family members, and informants were all to tell anyone who asked about him that they did not know what was going on with him. And because his investigations in the mob would cause him to spend extended time in New York and Florida, it meant that Pistone would have to spend a great deal of time away from his family. In his initial undercover assignment as Donnie Brasco, Pistone was sent to infiltrate the vehicle theft ring that had ties with organized crime. The assignment was supposed to only last 6 months, and armed with Brasco's backstory as that low-level jewel thief, it was up to Pistone to gain the trust of mobsters in this vehicle theft ring and figure out where they were storing their loot. As a result of the information that Pistone obtained during that 6-month assignment, the FBI was able to secure over 30 arrests, and it elevated Pistone in his law enforcement career. Pistone was so successful as Donnie Brasco that the FBI decided to allow him to continue his undercover work with the mob, hoping that it would lead to additional arrests for other organized crime activity that was impacting not only New York but other areas of the country as well. Pistone's success in his first assignment led to a second and lengthier assignment that was intended to gain information specifically about the Bonanno crime family and secure indictments on multiple different types of criminal activity. They were hoping that enough evidence would be gathered to take down their whole operation. And this required Brasco to take his time and build trust not only with suspected members of the mob, but the community around the mob as well. He had to hold up his cover and build credibility to essentially hide in plain sight. So the first 6 months of this second assignment were spent primarily floating between bars and restaurants in Brooklyn and Manhattan that were known to be frequented by mafiosos and their associates. Pistone, as Brasco, would strike up conversations and make contacts. He was mostly trying to blend in with the crowd and find leads, and blend in he did. Pistone's success in this undercover assignment was partially due to his background growing up in Paterson, New Jersey, in a working-class Italian-American family, and he became familiar with the behaviors of men in the mob and the behavior of their sons. In a 1991 interview with the Boston Globe, Pistone described how something as simple as knowing when to talk and when to just listen in a conversation with a mob man could indicate whether a newcomer was, quote, the real deal. Additionally, he understood that it took time to gain the trust of some of the crime family's most key players. And it took about a year of meandering through Little Italy before Donnie Brasco started to truly find his way into the circles of lower-level mobsters. But once he had finally gained their trust, they began to describe to him plans for their criminal schemes, and they began also offering him a chance to be a part of them. Most of these conversations, Pistone would record with a small recording device hidden in his clothing, and he would commit things like names and license plates to memory, as taking notes would have been far too suspicious. His biggest break in the investigation finally came in 1976 when he gained the trust of some more notable Bonanno family crime members. One in particular was Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero, a Bonanno soldier who was supposedly responsible for 26 kills. It was on Ruggiero's recommendation that Donnie Brasco was allowed into the fold at that time, and this would lead Pistone to gain access into the inner circle of Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano, a Bonanno family capo, in 1979. While undercover, Pistone, as Donnie Brasco, would have to abet with some of the criminal activity that Ruggiero and his colleagues engaged in. Donnie Brasco engaged in crimes like selling firearms, transferring stolen property, loan sharking, extortion, and even illegal gambling. A big challenge that Donnie Brasco had to face was how to get out of participating in certain crimes, most notably murder. Occasionally, something would come up where Donnie Brasco would need a mobster to vouch for him. This was the case in one instance where Pistone had insisted that, as Brasco, he was an expert in burglary alarms. And in order not to blow his cover, the FBI would enlist a specific informant who could quell any suspicion and vouch for Brasco and his skill. After finding himself in Sonny Black Napolitano's inner circle, Donnie Brasco made himself quite crucial for the big mob business deal in Holiday, Florida, where he was entrusted to open and operate the King's Court Bottle Club. While in Florida, Pistone collaborated with another undercover FBI agent with the alias Tony Rossi. The amount of trust that Sonny Black placed in Donnie Brasco was obviously immense, because by 1981, while in Florida, they came to a bit of a problem. Sonny Black Napolitano was now the acting boss of the Bonanno family, and he had recommended that Donnie Brasco earn his membership. However, to become a made man, it required Donnie Brasco to kill an adversary. And in 1981, while Donnie Brasco was in Florida running the King's Court Bottle Club and gathering intelligence on mob activity in the Sunshine State, Sonny Black contracted Pistone to kill the son of Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, who was one of his adversaries. This son hadn't shown up to a meeting where he was supposed to be killed with two of his associates, and Napolitano wanted the job done. Obviously, the FBI was not going to allow Pistone to actually commit the murder in order to achieve made man status. There were ways that the FBI could make the hit look like it had happened. However, it was determined that the risk of discovery was far too high, and the amount of evidence that Pistone had collected as Donnie Brasco over the last 6 years had been sufficient. So instead of going through with the hit, Pistone was pulled out of the operation. And if he was out of the undercover sting, he could begin assembling federal cases against mob associates and testifying in court in New York. In all, the evidence that Joe Pistone was able to collect as Donnie Brasco led to over 200 indictments of mob-related individuals and 120 arrests in federal racketeering cases. Additionally, Pistone's testimony was critical in the convictions of 21 mobsters in the Pizza Connection case of the 1980s, which involved mobsters utilizing a network of pizza restaurants to hide drug sales. Beyond the number of arrests and federal cases opened as a result of Pistone's undercover work, his investigation decimated the Bonanno crime family. Embarrassed by the fact that an FBI agent was able to infiltrate his inner circle, Sonny Black Napolitano was found murdered in August of 1981 in a mob-related hit. He had been shot and his hands had been cut off as a warning before being dumped in a creek in Staten Island. He evidently knew that the hit was coming, as he had been called to a sit-down and stopped by a favorite bar to have one final drink and conversation with a bartender friend before he went to his last meeting. The other key associate of Donnie Brasco's was Lefty Guns Ruggiero. Luckily for Lefty, the FBI caught up with him before the mob could, and he ended up serving a 10-year sentence in prison before dying of cancer 2 years after his release. As for the Bonanno crime family as a whole, Donnie Brasco played a significant role in its ultimate downfall. According to a Gambino family underboss turned FBI informant named Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, the humiliation caused by Joe Pistone's investigation led the other crime families of New York to suspend the Bonanno family from the commission, which is the mob's board of directors. In the end, the mob placed a $500,000 contract on Joe Pistone's head, but he was able to retire from the FBI for the first time in 1986 completely unscathed. Pistone ended up returning to work for the FBI in 1992 at the age of 53, and he remained with the agency until he reached the mandatory retirement age of 57. Donnie Brasco is just one of many undercover aliases that have led law enforcement to huge breaks in cases, and as you can see from Joe Pistone's story, the risks and sacrifices that a covert ops officer make are not for the faint of heart. If you're interested in learning more about covert ops, I highly recommend that you visit the museum. We have a small section on Joe Pistone and Donnie Brasco, but also have some artifacts from ATF agent Blake Boatler, who went undercover with the Sons of Silence motorcycle gang. The museum is open from Thursday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and we'd love to see you here if you find yourself in D.C. As always, thank you so much for listening and stay safe. We'll see you next time at the Precinct.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.